So this week for the fiction text, we have the story The Treasure of Lemon Brown by Walter Dean Myers. I'll start by reading a little bit about the author in this gray box before we move on to the story. I will be recording the story in two parts. Walter Dean Myers was an American writer of children's books and young adult literature. Myers wrote over 100 books and received the Coretta Scott King Award for African American authors 5 times. In this short story, a boy meets an old man who will protect his treasure at all costs. As you read, take notes on Greg Ridley's feelings and how they change over the story. All right, so paragraph 1. The dark sky, filled with angry, swirling clouds, reflected Greg Ridley's mood as he sat on the stoop of his building. His father's voice came to him again, first reading the letter the principal had sent to the house, then lecturing endlessly about his poor efforts in math. "I had to leave school when I was 13, his father had said. "That's a year younger than you are now. If I'd had half the chances you have, I'd..." Greg sat in the small, pale green kitchen listening, knowing the lecture would end with his father saying he couldn't play ball with the Scorpions. He had asked his father the week before, and his father had said it depended on his next report card. It wasn't often the Scorpions took on new players, especially 14-year-olds. And this was a chance of a lifetime for Greg. He hadn't been allowed to play high school ball, which he had really wanted to do, but playing for the community center team was the next best thing. Report cards were due in a week, and Greg had been hoping for the best. But the principal had ended the suspense early when she sent the letter saying Greg would probably fail math if he didn't spend more time studying. "And you want to play basketball?" His father's brows knitted over deep brown eyes. "That must be some kind of joke. Now you just get into your room and hit those books." That had been 2 nights before. His father's words, like the distant thunder that now echoed through the streets of Harlem, still rumbled softly in his ears. It was beginning to cool. Gusts of wind made bits of paper dance between the parked cars. There was a flash of nearby lightning, and soon large drops of rain splashed onto his jeans. He stood to go upstairs, thought of the lecture that probably awaited him if he did anything except shut himself in his room with his math book, and started walking down the street instead. Down the block, there was an old tenement that had been abandoned for some months. Some of the guys had held an impromptu checker tournament there the week before, and Greg had noticed that the door, once boarded over, had been slightly ajar. Just as a reminder, if you have a word you don't know, and it has a little number above it, that's to give you directions to the footnote below, which would give you a definition of the word. All right. Pulling his collar up as high as he could, he checked the traffic and made a dash across the street. He reached the house just as another flash of lightning changed the night to day for an instant, then returned the graffiti-scarred building to the grim shadows. He vaulted over the outer stairs and pushed tentatively on the door. It was open, and he let himself in. The inside of the building was dark, except for the dim light that filtered through the dirty windows from the street lamps. There was a room a few feet from the door, and from where he stood in the entrance, Greg could see a squarish patch of light on the floor. He entered the room, frowning at the musty smell. It was a large room that might have been someone's parlor at one time. Squinting, Greg could see an old table on its side against one wall, what looked like a pile of rags or a torn mattress in the corner, and a couch with one side broken in front of the window. He went to the couch. The side that wasn't broken was comfortable enough, though a little creaky. From the spot he could see the blinking neon sign over the bodega on the corner. He sat a while, watching the sign blink first green, then red, allowing his mind to drift to the Scorpions, then to his father. His father had been a postal worker for all Greg's life, and was proud of it, often telling Greg how hard he had worked to pass the test. Greg had heard the story too many times to be interested now. Paragraph 10. For a moment, Greg thought he heard something that sounded like a scraping against the wall. He listened carefully, but it was gone. Outside, the wind had picked up, sending the rain against the window with a force that shook the glass in its frame. The car passed, its tires hissing over the wet street and its red tail lights glowing in the darkness. Greg thought he heard the noise again. His stomach tightened as he held himself still and listened intently. There weren't any more scraping noises, but he was sure he had heard something in the darkness, something breathing. He tried to figure out just where the breathing was coming from. He knew it was in the room with him. Slowly he stood, tensing. As he turned, a flash of lightning lit up the room, frightening him with its sudden brilliance. He saw nothing, just the overturned table, the pile of rags, and an old newspaper on the floor. Could he have been imagining the sounds? He continued listening, but heard nothing and thought that it might have just been rats. Still, he thought as soon as the rain let up, he would leave. He went to the window and was about to look when he heard a voice behind him. "Don't try nothing, 'cause I got a razor sharp enough to cut a week into 9 days. Paragraph 15. Greg, except for an involuntary tremor in his knees, stood stock still. The voice was high and brittle, like dry twigs being broken, surely not one he had ever heard before. There was a shuffling sound as the person who had been speaking moved a step closer. Greg turned, holding his breath, his eyes straining to see in the dark room. The upper part of the figure before him was still in darkness. The lower half was in the dim rectangle of light that fell unevenly from the window. There were 2 feet in cracked, dirty shoes from which rose legs that were wrapped in rags. "Who are you?" Greg hardly recognized his own voice. "I'm Lemon Brown," came the answer. "Who are you?" "Greg Ridley." "What are you doing here?" The figure shuffled forward and Greg took a small step backwards. "It's raining," Greg said. "I can see that," the figure said. The person who called himself Lemon Brown peered forward, and Greg could see him clearly. He was an old man. His black, heavily wrinkled face was surrounded by a halo of crinkly white hair and whiskers that seemed to separate his head from the layers of dirty clothes piled on his smallish frame. His pants were bagged to the knee, where they were met with rags that went down to the old shoes. The rags were held on with strings, and there was a rope around the middle. Greg relaxed. He had seen the man before, picking through the trash on the corner and pulling clothes out of the Salvation Army box. There was no sign of a razor that could cut a week into 9 days. "What are you doing here?" Greg asked. "This is where I'm staying," Lemon Brown said. "What are you here for?" "Told you, it was raining out," Greg said, leaning against the back of the couch until he felt it give slightly. "Ain't you got no home?" "I got a home," Greg answered. "You ain't one of them bad boys looking for my treasure, is you?" Lemon Brown cocked his head to one side and squinted one eye. "Because I told you I got me a razor." "I'm not looking for your treasure," Greg answered, smiling, "if you have one." "What you mean if I have one?" Lemon Brown said. "Every man got a treasure. You don't know that. You must be a fool." "Sure," Greg said as he sat on the sofa and put one leg over the back. "What do you have? Gold coins?" "Don't worry none about what I got," Lemon Brown said. "You know who I am?" "You told me your name was Orange or Lemon or something like that." "Lemon Brown," the old man said, pulling back his shoulders as he did so. "They used to call me Sweet Lemon Brown." "Sweet Lemon?" Greg asked. "Yes, sir, Sweet Lemon Brown. They used to say I sung the blues so sweet that if I sang at a funeral, the dead would commence to rockin' with the beat. Used to travel all over Mississippi and as far as Monroe, Louisiana, and east on over to Macon, Georgia." "You mean you ain't never heard of Sweet Lemon Brown?" "Afraid not," Greg said. "What happened to you? Hard times, boy, hard times, always after a poor man. One day I got tired, sat down to rest a spell, and felt a tap on my shoulder. Hard times caught up with me. Sorry about that. What are you doing here? How come you don't go home when the rain come? Rain don't bother you young folks none. Just didn't. Greg looked away. I used to have a naughty-headed boy, just like you. Lemon Brown had half walked, half shuffled back to the corner and sat down against the wall. Had them big eyes like you got. I used to call them moon eyes. Look into them moon eyes and see anything you want. How come you gave up singing the blues? Greg asked. Didn't give it up, Lemon Brown said. You don't give up the blues. They give you up. After a while you do good for yourself, and it ain't nothing but foolishness singing about how hard you got it. Ain't that right? I guess so. What's that noise? Lemon Brown asked, suddenly sitting upright. Greg listened and he heard a noise outside. He looked at Lemon Brown and saw the old man pointing towards the window.